Legio Venator, or the Iron Spiders, are a Titan legion founded early in the Age of Strife. The Legio was created to exterminate a numerous Xenos foe that inhabited their home Forge world. The Legio's insignia is that of the Arachnid or Spider. The Legion's colors are a pale gray and a ghostly white. The armor panels of the Titans frequently bore a web pattern mimicking a spider's main method of trapping its prey. These armor panels were frequently trimmed with steel frames of black and deep silver. Legio Venator calls the planet Arachnus their home forge. Located within the Segmentum Tempestus, the planet was roughly 3 times the size of Terra, and was found in a region known as the Belt of Iron. Prior to the Age of Strife, the planet Arachnus earned the attention of Mars for its lucrative mineral deposits and natural resources. The planet held enough resources and materials to fuel the production of even the most demanding forges. Arachnus itself is a planet of lush jungles and deadly fauna, rivaling that of the Death World Catachan. Though the planet's environment would make the expansion of Mars difficult, it was actually a native species of giant arachnids that would delay the colonization. This giant spider species put up so much opposition to the Mechanicum fleets, Mars would actually have to settle the 2 Arachnus moons of Ictoma and Nezkari before moving on to the planet's surface. These moons themselves would become great forges of military production, and actually be the birthplace of the Iron Spider's first god engines, not the planet of Arachnus itself. With the moon industries established and Legio Venator awakened, the Legio would launch its efforts to the planet against the giant spider species for the rich minerals beneath. It would take Legio Venator almost a century just to establish a reliable landing zone, all while being assaulted constantly by the giant arachnid forms. From the fortified LZ, the Legio and their mass infantry support would take another 6 centuries to eradicate the giant spiders from the planet's wilderness. The final conquest of Arachnus' surface would cost a monumental number of Mechanicum lives and nearly 100 god engines from the Legio itself. It was in this conquest and campaign the Legion earned its name, the Iron Spiders, and the 2 moons were finally able to utilize the Arachnus resources. This protracted campaign of colonization would take in total around 700 years. Arachnus would fortify the planet itself, now having the powerful production capacity of the planet and the 2 forge moons. This strength would allow the people of Arachnus to expand into the space around them, forging a powerful empire within the Belt of Iron. All of this was done with the now experienced Venator in its vanguard and at the Forge Empire's defense. When the Emperor's explorator fleets of the Great Crusade expanded into the Segmentum Tempestus, they discovered a strong, flourishing Forge Empire built around the planet Arachnus itself. The Imperium demanded Arachnus and its holdings join the Imperium or face destruction. In a rare occurrence, the Empire of Arachnus actually refused to bow to the forces of mankind united under the Emperor, for they had spent almost 1,000 years building this empire and were not too keen on handing it over to another force or faction. In return, the Emperor turned the full might of his Great Crusade and war machines against the forces of Arachnus within the Belt of Iron. War erupted everywhere across the system. Recognizing the strength of the Arachnus forces and the Titan Legio they fought with, the recently acquired Legios of Astraman and Lanascari were thrown against the Iron Spiders. The Titan engagements would be a costly affair for both sides. After a half-decade war, 3/4 of the Arachnus Empire lay in Imperial hands, facing heavy losses within Legio Venator and seeing the inexhaustible fleets of the Emperor closing in on Arachnus itself. The Forge World and its leaders were forced to begrudgingly surrender to the Imperium. After a truce was negotiated, most of the worlds were returned to Arachnus' oversight and control under the Imperium's banner, bar those few seized by the Mars Mechanicum for the actions of Arachnus against them. Though no evidence exists of the Arachnus bureaucrats plotting against the Imperium, it was clear they did not like being forced into the Imperium as a whole. A benefit of this new alliance was that Arachnus was allowed to expand its hold and rebuild Legio Venator to its former glory. By the late stages of the Great Crusade, a full 2/3 of the Legio would join the Crusade explorator fleets, and the remaining third would guard the holdings of the Arachnus Empire. In the end, Arachnus would benefit from its Imperium alliance through strong manufacturing and production. The weaponry produced by the Forge became a preference of the Emperor's own bodyguard, the Adeptus Custodes. The Forge Empire's fine craftsmanship of weapons were highly sought after among the 10,000, in particular their laser technology. When news of the Primarch Horus's betrayal reached Arachnus, there was much conflict among the Arachnian hierarchy. On one hand, the Forge was forcefully drawn into its Imperial alliance through defeat and remained resentful. On the other hand, the Forge was able to prosper and expand its empire with the security of the Imperium behind them. Arachnus would remain unsure of where to place their allegiance even after years of debate. Eventually, a decision was finally made to recall all elements of Legio Venator to the Forge Empire's heart, the Arachnus system. As the warfare of the heresy began to spread across the belt, the loyal crusade elements of Venator that were attached to the explorator fleets were sent to the Imperial forces' aid, the result of which would cause mass casualties among the elements of Venator loyal to the Emperor. These crusade elements sustained casualties fighting Horus within the region and would leave behind many demi-legios of Venator loyal only to the Forge Empire and Arachnus itself. Though Arachnus and Venator would contribute forces against the traitor Horus, the largest trial of the heresy would be an internal struggle. Mere months after committing its crusade forces to the defense of the belt with the Imperium, Arachnus would declare itself an independent empire and stand unaligned with either side. The remainder of loyal Titan elements to the Imperium were cast out to the stars, and the forces loyal to Arachnus remained in the Arachnus system under a new banner. Effectively, the Legion would be split in half. Arachnus would rename its forces Legio Tritonus, the Dark Tide, in honor of the homeworld and its two moons, where the cast-out loyal element would retain the name of Legio Venator. The wayward forces of Venator, now orphaned and alone, would turn a secondary Forge fortress into their base of operation. Earned during the Great Crusade, this Forge fortress was located on the planet of Condit. From the base, Venator would launch missions and campaigns in an effort to gain support for their quest to reconquer their home of Arachnus. Venator would continue to support loyal forces of the Emperor and lend aid in the fight against Horus. All these efforts were done with the hopes of earning new allies and bolster supplies. After its efforts to defend the Imperium and end the Horus heresy, Venator would return to the Arachnus system with a new ally, Legio Venator. Tritonus and Arachnus, for their part, would be greatly weakened in power compared to their pre-separation strength. Being forced to defend its empire alone against the forces of Horus and any other Xenos threats to enter the space, the losses were a war of attrition that Tritonus could not maintain. When Venator once again strode forth on Arachnus with Ateris, the Forge world was a fraction of its former glory, leading to an easy victory and homecoming for the Iron Spiders. By the end of the heresy, Condit would actually be a stronger seat of power than the Forge world that spat its loyal forces out alone. Before declaring its independence from the Imperium, the Legion's Titan crews were known for protecting their princeps at all costs. The crews of Venator extensively trained together, and multiple Titans were able to work in unison without the need for wardens. Overall, the Legion's tactics were adaptable, with lots of inbuilt redundancies. This was all shaped by the unpredictability of fighting the Arachnid swarms on their home forge. After declaring its neutrality and splitting from the Imperium, the fracture of the Legion became known as the Trident's Purge, and produced two prominent ideologies within the Venator crews. Essentially, the forces of Arachnus and its Titan Legion would produce two types of princeps, with significant differences best described as Guardians and Wardens. The Guardians were the portion of Venator sent out during the Great Crusade and assigned to multiple explorator fleets. After the Trident's Purge, this section of the Legion would retain the name of Venator. The princeps themselves were praised for their devotion to mankind and willing self-sacrifice for the Imperium. These Titan crews would form strong bonds with their allies and actively coordinate their efforts with the forces they were employed in. When Venator reconquered Arachnus at the end of the heresy, the Guardians would change the kill markings of their Titans from black to white, indicating how many of their Tritonus kin they slayed for their act of betrayal. The Wardens were the Venator crews not deployed with the explorator fleets in the Great Crusade. These princeps would guard the territories of the Arachnus Empire and were deployed to war only in the most extreme circumstances. Being the oldest and most experienced Venator crews, these Titans and princeps could remember the Forge Empire before its bloody assimilation into the Imperium. Remembering the war of their subjugation, the crews would remain spiteful towards the Imperium as a whole, and only identify with those within the Forge Empire. These Titan commanders were described as bitter and melancholic, carrying themselves as if depressed with a weight on their shoulders. The Wardens were resistant to take orders from any faction outside of their own empire. In the battlefield, they viewed damage dealt to their Titan as an insult and would strive to rip their opponent apart. These Venator crews would eventually become known as Legio Tritonus, the traitorous legion that turned away from the Imperium and the Emperor during the midst of the Horus heresy. Prior to the heresy, the Iron Spiders were classed as a Secundus grade Titan Legio. The Legio as a whole saw its numbers fluctuate greatly based on the many trials it would experience. The Arachnid extermination of Arachnus would cost the Legion around 100 god engines over 700 years just to conquer the surface. These losses were steadily replaced as the campaign continued. At the time of the Imperium rediscovery, Venator was estimated at a strength of around 134 god engines, with 2 Imperator-class Titans. Of this strength, only 54 would survive the Legio's bloody indoctrination into the Imperium. Within a decade of the Imperium and Venator reaching a truce, the Legion would rebuild its numbers back to around 120 to 34 god engines and recontribute to the Great Crusade. When the Horus heresy dug its claws into the Empire of Man, the fracture of Tritonus would reduce the Legion to around 67 god engines. The remainder would join the ranks of Tritonus itself. During the civil war, known as the Trident's Purge on Arachnus, this would cost the Venator element 34 god engines, reducing their numbers almost in half to around 34 to 37 god engines. By the end of the heresy, Venator would be composed almost entirely of Reaver and Warhound Titans, with a handful of heavier class Titans. A large portion of the heresy surviving Venator Titans were restored enemy Titans taken from the battlefield during the Cataclysm of Iron. The following's a rough estimate of Venator's post-heresy strength, as they did have elements survive into the 41st millennia. As the Forge Empire of Arachnus tried to separate from the Imperium during the Great Crusade, almost all of Legio Venator's noteworthy engagements occurred during the Cataclysm of Iron within the Belt of Iron region. These campaigns and noteworthy engagements include the devastation of Yanazar, the fate of Jerulus Station, the Dark Tide, and the conquest of Nidrina, ultimately ending on the Reckoning, where Venator retook the planet of Arachnus itself with the aid of a Taurus. That was a brief look at Legio Venator and the Legio's history. I hope you enjoyed the video. I found the reason for Venator's founding to be quite entertaining. Full credit for the Reaver Titan that's made multiple appearances on the slides goes to Garrett, John Condit, Severson for being the only legend to post a picture of a Venator painted Titan online. In the next video, we'll take a look at the Titanicus rules for Legio Venator and how I would play them on the tabletop. If you're enjoying the channel content, then feel free to subscribe to the channel, or if you don't want to miss your Titan Legion when they get spotlighted. I'll catch everybody on the next post. Take it easy.